I have this nook right as you come in from the garage, and I wanted to do some mudroom built-ins. So I built it in 3 parts: the bench, which is a separate video, the coat rack portion, also a separate video, and then this one is the cubbies at the top. I'm working with a 4x8 sheet of 5/8 inch MDF. This is the same sheet I bought for the coat rack portion of the build, and there's enough left over to do the cubbies as well. It's the only piece of material I bought for the job. Everything else I had around the house or reclaimed or repurposed. To make the cuts, I'm just clamping a long piece of metal to the board and using it as a guide for my circular saw. I need 3 of these pieces, 2 of which I'm going to sandwich together to make a thicker shelf on the bottom, and then the 3rd piece is going to be on the top. I am reusing this cardboard template that I used to make the mudroom bench, but I'm having to recut it because we're further up the wall now and the walls are not plumb. Once I have that measurement right, I can transfer it to the shelf and cut all 3 shelves to the right width. I want the bottom shelf to have a thicker appearance, and so I grabbed some scrap plywood and I'm just cutting it into strips. I'm going to take these strips and glue them vertically in between 2 of the MDF shelves. That's going to serve 2 purposes. One is to give me the thickness I'm looking for, but also to serve as strengthening ribs for the MDF. I'm going to be spanning almost 4 feet, and this is only 5/8 inch MDF, which is not very structurally sound. So by adding these plywood ribs across, I'm going to give the whole thing a lot more structural strength. I'm just using glue here and a lot of clamps and weights and letting the glue sit overnight to dry. So here it is the next day, and you can see we've got this sandwiched MDF plywood structure. The cubbies are going to be about 12 inches high, so I also need 4 12-inch vertical dividers. One of the reasons I like MDF is because it has a real smooth paintable surface. So I primed all this stuff and then put a couple of coats of semi-gloss trim to match the existing trim. Here I'm marking on the bottom shelf where those 4 vertical pieces are going to go. I'm going to be assembling this up in the air on top of the built-ins. So instead of having to measure and align everything while it's up, I'm getting these spacers in now, which should make it easier to align those vertical pieces. So this shelf is just going to sit on top of the coat rack section of the built-in, and I'm running a bead of glue to hold it in place. I want the front of the cubbies to be flush with the front of the coat rack section, so I'm just using a scrap piece of 5/8 inch MDF to get the spacing right. Next step is to put up the 4 vertical pieces. So I'm just again running some glue, and I'm using the spacers that I put in on the bottom shelf as guides. And now I'm putting on the top shelf, again securing it with glue. You may be wondering why not just build the whole set of cubbies on the ground and put them up in one piece. But as you can see, I'm having to tilt these pieces at a diagonal to get them into this narrow area. And if I built the whole set of cubbies, there would not have been enough play to tilt them and get them in. So that's the basic structure of the cubby, and then I need a face frame to make the front look pretty. So I'm cutting 2 1/4 inch strips of MDF. I cut those to length and paint and prime them, and then to join them I'm using a biscuit joiner, which I went through in detail in the last video, but basically it cuts a slot into either side of where you want to join 2 pieces of wood, and then you use a small wooden, what they call a biscuit, and you glue it in on both sides. It helps align the joint, and also the glue, when it hits the biscuit, causes it to expand and really hold those 2 pieces securely together. So back over to the built-in, I'm just putting glue in all the slots that I just cut, putting biscuits in, and then assembling the face frame onto the front of the cubbies. So this face frame is something that I could have assembled on the ground and put up in one piece, but because this is the part you really see, I wanted it to align really well with the shelf and the vertical pieces and the wall. And that's just easiest to do if you assemble it piece by piece, glue it, and nail it just so. You'll see that this top piece is a little bit wider than the other pieces on the face frame, and that's so I can put a piece of crown up there and have something to nail into. So for the crown, I had this piece of walnut laying around from an old project. It's not ideal because the other stained parts of this built-in are pine, and walnut takes stain differently than pine, but I'm calling it close enough. And that's about it. Fill in a few nail holes and add some caulk, and call this one done.